Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover the book Free Speech by Jacob Mchangama, A History from Socrates to Social Media. This is book 7 for my 2025 reading list. Well, I'm the business manager at Landmark Booksellers here in Franklin, Tennessee, and we had Jacob here for an event at the bookstore last week. And Joel J. Miller interviewed him, and then Nadine Strawson, the former national president of the ACLU, introduced him at the very beginning. So that was a treat to have both of them there alongside Jacob. It was a wonderful event. It was a great conversation. We recorded it, and I will link in the show notes to that event if you would like to watch that. There was some great Q&A session and questions at the end as well that I think you would really enjoy. So if you're interested more in this book or Jacob, the author, that would be a great additional piece to watch. So I read this book in preparation for that event. And what it does is it gives a very thorough history of free speech throughout the ages. So it's starting with the Greeks, getting into the Romans, through the Middle Ages, and then into our modern times. As the subtitle suggests, a history from Socrates to social media. So it brings up a lot of the history, but then also the questions that have been at the forefront of the free speech debate over all of that time. Thomas Gordon in the early 1700s made this rather famous statement about freedom of speech. He said, "Freedom of speech is the great bulwark of liberty. They prosper and die together." And so they, in this case, is freedom of speech and liberty. So they prosper and die together. And it is the terror of traitors and oppressors and a barrier against them. End quote. So just fantastic quote there. It's referenced a lot in this book. The great bulwark of liberty. And that's what freedom of speech is. And that particular phrase comes from a series of letters known as Cato's letters, and that's from letter 15, in which Thomas Gordon wrote that part. Another part, it says, Jacob actually says that free speech is the only effectual guardian of every other right. So it is the linchpin in so many cases. It's the First Amendment in the United States. It's the one that all the others hinge upon. It's the hinge right of in some degree, and its close tie-in together with liberty is a theme throughout this book. So a few observations from the book. One in about free speech is just how recent it is. Like how so much of history, it was not the case where you could speak your mind. You could say what you thought. It's a very fragile thing that even now there's always a push and a pull, and it's always in a fragile state. And for much of history and much of the history that Jacob goes through in this book, there was this widespread fear that there would be a complete societal breakdown if not everyone had the same beliefs. And so to thwart that, one of the easiest ways to stop that is to keep people from speaking and speaking their mind. But you also have these contrasts throughout this book where it's elitist versus egalitarian. So a lot of people, Voltaire included, thought that, yeah, it's fine for the elite to have free speech, but not so much the common people. And then there's also this fierce battle between order and liberty. And so the people at the top, they want order to be maintained. And there's this fear that if you give in to, if you allow free speech, that would destroy the order. And then thus it would lead to anarchy and all sorts of things. So it also takes other forms, though, free speech and the attacks against it. There's something that's talked about in this book of the tyranny of prevailing opinion. And so just, this fear of saying something outside of the norm, or outside of what is the popular thing, or the narrative being pushed, whether that's on a social media platform or just in general. So the tyranny of prevailing opinion, and just even how hard it is to speak your mind against that. And so the response to many of us is just for censorship. And so there's all these different aspects of what make up free speech, how it's limited, how we limit it ourselves through that censorship and that sort of thing. So I want to read one part here talking about how strange it was and how opportune, just with that a new government needed to come across, and then how colonial America, how ideas were germinating at that time. So let me read this part. The British tendency to value order over liberty and the informal protection of press freedom in the Dutch Republic suggested that no form of government had yet been devised in which egalitarian free speech could truly thrive. Establishing such a state of affairs would require a political as well as a cultural revolution, and it just so happened that revolutionary dissent was germinating in colonial America. Indeed, free speech would soon become an indispensable rallying cry for would-be revolutionaries on both sides of the Atlantic. But once press freedom had lit the revolutionary fuse, many of those who had fanned the blazing flame of freedom scampered to douse the fire for fear of being burned. End quote. But just that part of it, it would require a political as well as a cultural revolution, and that at that time, no form of government had yet been devised in which egalitarian free speech could truly thrive. That was an amazing thing to consider. Up to that point, you didn't even really have the governmental structure to allow that. And he talks about previous periods, or even in Rome, where the idea of people like Cicero was that the elite could speak, but not the common people. And so there wasn't even really a concept of government that would allow that. The final observation I want to make here through the book is just how amazing it is to consider that so much of this progress and so much of the story of free speech can be traced through the great books. And what was so great about the event at Landmark Booksellers is they were speaking right in front of our Great Wall. And our Great Wall is the great books of all time in chronological order on these four shelves that we have. And so the event was taking place right in front of that. And as Jacob was talking about the book, as Joel was interviewing him, they would turn around and say, and here's the book right here we've just been discussing. And so that's a really incredible thing, how so many of these ideas have come to us through the great books. I want to read at the very beginning here what Jacob what his hope was for this book. And so this is on page 8 in the introduction, the very last paragraph. To impose silence and call it tolerance does not make it so. Real tolerance requires understanding. Understanding comes from listening. Listening presupposes speech. By connecting past speech controversies and the most pressing contemporary ones, I hope to demonstrate just how much humanity has gained from the gradual spread of free speech, and just how much we stand to lose if we allow its continued erosion in the most recent digital phase of the age-old conflict between authority and free expression. End quote. And Jacob lives right here in Franklin, Tennessee. He is a research professor at Vanderbilt University, and he founded a group there. He's the founder and the executive director of the Future of Free Speech, and is also a senior fellow at FIRE. Reading stats for this book, it took me 13 hours and 20 minutes to read it. It's a 416-page book. I had made it through about halfway through the book by the time of the event. I was hoping to finish it before the event, but then I finished reading it after the event. So total days, I read it between April 3rd and 11th of this year. So in the rest of this episode, I'll have two more segments. The next segment, I want to tie a lot of ideas from this book together through the lens of free speech culture. And then in segment 3, I will cover the one thing, so my key takeaway from this book, the thing that really stuck out to me the most. There's a very interesting discussion in this book about free speech culture, and it's something I hadn't considered before, but it goes into the question of, can you just write a law? Can you make something like the First Amendment, and then that's what creates free speech, and then it's just there? Or is it more important to have a culture of free speech in the sense of there's an overwhelming majority of people who have it inside themselves to desire that and to want that and to fight for it? So what's more important, to have the law on the books or to have this kind of upswell in the society, in the community itself? And none other than George Orwell made this comment about that. If large numbers of people are interested in freedom of speech, there will be freedom of speech, even if the law forbids it. If public opinion is sluggish, inconvenient minorities will be persecuted, even if the law exists to protect them. End quote. Greg Lukianoff, the president of FIRE, he said it this way: free speech culture is more important than the First Amendment. It's what informs the First Amendment today, and it is what will decide if our current free speech protections will survive into the future. Page 203 and 204 of this book, Jacob asks a question and then he answers it on the following page. So here's the question. Is the key to its endurance the wording of constitutions or declarations? Or is it a nation's commitment to a culture of free speech and the tolerance of the controversies, offensive ideas, and very public disagreement about fundamental values that inevitably arise from this freedom? So that's the question, and then Jacob responds on the next page with this answer. If there is any merit in this interpretation, the difference between the uncompromising wording of the First Amendment and the equivocal nature of Article 11 of the French Declaration might have been less decisive for the different free speech climates than the popular attitudes towards free speech that these differences reflected. And then just a few lines down, liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can even do so much to help it. While it lies there, it needs no constitution, no law, no court to save it. End quote. That very helpful way to consider it and just for us to understand our role in that as well, of fighting for free speech and how it is at the individual level. It's at the cultural level, but it starts with us, and it starts with each of us being concerned about it and fighting for it. But it's interesting on how you fight for it. And so let me read one quote here from Nelson Mandela. All lawful modes of expressing opposition had been closed by legislation, and we were placed in a position in which we had either to accept a permanent state of inferiority or to defy the government. We first broke the law in a way which avoided any recourse to violence. When this form was legislated against, and when the government resorted to a show of force to crush opposition to its policies, only then did we decide to answer violence with violence. End quote. And then Jacob continues with this commentary. In other words, Mandela offered a pressure cooker theory in which peaceful dissent is the antithesis of violence. Only when free speech and peaceful protest is denied can violence be justified. End quote. So here you have what I've talked about in a lot of different episodes. This idea from the Greek tragedies of Ares versus Areopagus, and Ares is the god of war, the god of force, the god of violence, and that's contrasted with the Areopagus, and this shows up in the Oresteia by Aeschylus, and the Areopagus is where deliberation is founded, democracy, the rule of law, justice. It's on this Areopagus, which is right close to the Acropolis in Athens there. But the idea is you either have one or the other. You've got the deliberation and talking things through, or you've got violence, you've got force. And you see this come up in so many of the different tragedy plays and writings from that time. And that's really what this is getting into. With free speech, it opens up a release valve for people. And when that is closed, when you can't express yourself, when you can't share what you're wanting to say, and there's no more room for expression, violence will be the next result. And let me read one other thing that Nelson Mandela said that was excellent. No single person, no body of opinion, no political or religious doctrine, no political party or government can claim to have a monopoly on truth. For that reason, truth can be arrived at only through the untrammeled contest between and among competing opinions, in which as many viewpoints as possible are given a fair and equal hearing. It has therefore always been our contention that laws, mores, practices, and prejudices that place constraints on freedom of expression are a disservice to society. So you see how this is all tying into that idea of the free speech culture and how there's so many different aspects of it, but they need to be moving in that direction of freedom of speech. And again, this is what gets into our daily decisions and how we play a role in that, whether we have a principled view or whether we are those who are for free speech when it benefits us, but we're against it when it doesn't benefit us. And I'll get into that a little bit more in the final segment, but that's something that comes up quite a bit in this book. Just one more aspect of this free speech culture, and I'm going to talk about it in the sense of the Weimar fallacy. So this is Weimar Republic. And so what Jacob talks about this as is he says that the Weimar fallacy is one of the most common and intuitively appealing arguments for limiting tolerance of intolerance. It argues that if only the Weimar Republic had done more to prohibit totalitarian propaganda, Nazi Germany and thus the Holocaust might have been avoided, end quote. And what this book shows is that this rarely works out in history. Rather, if one group limits free speech, it oftentimes extends to those who are in power next. Or as George Orwell said, if you encourage totalitarian methods, the time may come when they will be used against you instead of for you. And Frederick Douglass once made the comment, the right of speech is a very precious one, especially to the oppressed, end quote. And so if you ban hate speech in one part, in one time period, in order to protect minorities, it nearly always ends up hurting them in the next the next part of history. And so there's this strong emphasis in the book. It's especially in our time right now. It's a huge idea. It's a huge temptation to, as it's put here, to limit the tolerance of intolerance, but when you look back at history, when you look at the examples in this book, what you find is that it may sound good, it may make for great sound bites, but in practice, it does not work well, and it usually ends up hurting the people that are you're trying to protect. So that free speech really is that linchpin, and it's the thing that leads to liberty. All right, so that's the main things about the culture of free speech. And now in the final segment here, I'll get into my one thing. Well, this book talks a lot about the principle of free speech and how the principled person would be one who believes that free speech for me and for thee alike. So the shocking thing in this book, and my one thing, is that I couldn't believe, like, almost all the people that we think of as being those who fought for free speech, they were for it when it benefited them. They were against it when it wasn't so good for them. Nearly everyone. I mean, it was just astonishing. I mean, people that we think of as the bulwarks of freedom of speech, there was always this other side, and it was really disturbing and really disconcerting because, and I guess just shows the fragility of it all, and how hard it is, and how amazing it is that we're at this point in our history where it is enshrined as a First Amendment in this country, and free speech is kind of in decline right now, just worldwide, but just how incredible it is for that even to be an idea that is out there at the moment. And so one thing I wrote in the back of the book is I don't think anyone has practiced what they've preached so far. And I just was astonished at how few people were principled that I read about in this book. So, for example, Voltaire, he's got the famous saying, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." And Jacob said, well, he wasn't exactly willing to die for that. And he viewed free speech, he kind of had more of that Roman view that free speech was a privilege for the enlightened few. And someone else who did not hold to free speech across and for all people was John Milton. And so Jacob, in this book, he talks about Milton's curse, and the definition of that being the selective and unprincipled defense of free speech. And he says this later on, that Milton, the scourge of censors, would become a licenser himself is indeed one of the great ironies of the history of free speech. End quote. So that was very discouraging to me, and that's my one thing and the biggest thing to me in this book. And so when Jacob was at Landmark Booksellers for the event, the question that I was most curious about was, after he had done this research and spent so many years, he's got a podcast that talks about a lot of these issues as well. After he's gone through all this, he's done all this research, read about all these different people throughout history. I said, who are three people who maintained a principled stance on free speech throughout their lives? No matter what aspect of power they had, maybe when they weren't in power and they were all for free speech, and then once they got to power, who were the people who were truly principled? And I said, can you name three of them? And he said, yes. Frederick Douglass is the first one. And he said that Frederick Douglass is his favorite American. He's my favorite American as well. So I loved that. I loved hearing that. Frederick Douglass has said freedom cannot tolerate free speech. Slavery cannot tolerate free speech. And then the right of speech is a very precious one, especially to the oppressed. The second person that Jacob mentioned was George Orwell. Again, another example of someone who was principled throughout their life. And then the third person was Nadine Strawson, who was in attendance at the event. So those were the three people he mentioned had maintained a principled approach to free speech throughout their lives. And so that was neat to hear. A couple things that I wish the book had covered that it didn't. One was just, I was curious, and this is just more a curiosity that I have, because we learn about so many different things that led to the advent of free speech. But I just wondered how much the imago Dei had in that, and that's the part of Genesis where it says we're made in the image of God, and just how that places an importance on the individual to a level that had not been there before. And so that idea has had huge ramifications in history. How much of the idea of free speech and the pushing for it is tied back to that idea. And then the second one is just how that kind of the Aries versus Areopagus idea and how that shows up in the Oresteia by Aeschylus. I wish he had covered that, because at least in book form of where these ideas came from, that's a crucial one, where Athena and it establishes democracy and rule of law and all these things, and it's kind of in a book format there. So he talked about different aspects of Greek culture. I thought that would have been a good part that would have fit in well. But it's a large book, so he's got to cut and decide what goes in. But those were just a couple of things that I thought might have been missing in the book. In conclusion, P.J. O'Rourke called this the best history of free speech ever written and the best defense of free speech ever made. This is a thorough history of free speech. I really enjoyed it. I didn't know a lot of this history. When you're reading about it, you see its importance. You see its fragility. You see how things can quickly go south, and you see, I guess there's that disappointment too of my one thing of how few principled people there have been throughout history in this regard. However, there have also been a lot of people who were killed for their belief in this and their expression of speech. And so I guess you could say those were principled people, and they lost their lives as a result of it. I really liked how Jacob would pull in modern terms. So he'd say, this is like the dark web, or this is the VPN of their day. And that just kind of helped me understand what a lot of these things were, and just relating it to terms that we use today. One quote in the book that is just excellent and kind of sums a lot up is, in fact, free speech may well be the most powerful engine of equality ever devised by humankind. End quote. So it's up to us. It's up to us to protect free speech. It's up to us to be principled in that, to where we protect it at all costs. We protect it whether it benefits or hurts us. And that is not a very common thing. It's not a common thing through history. It's not a common thing even in a society that has a First Amendment, or in a world that has rather high levels of free speech compared to other times. This is it is something that continually needs to be fought for and thought about. So it's helpful to know this history and just to know how precious that free speech truly is. I think you'd enjoy this book. It's just the parts of the history, and then just where we're at today, but then seeing how that history has led to where we are today was fascinating. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you, especially if you've read this book, Free Speech. You can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. But if it is a comment about the book or something that you want to share, please comment on Substack, because then other people can see that. They can join in on the conversation, and I would love for that to happen, where we're discussing the book in public. I think that would be great. As for what I'm currently reading, I am reading a book called, let me get it, There's Nothing Like This, and it's the business strategy of Taylor Swift. So this is by the senior editor of the Harvard Business Review, Kevin Evers, and he's going to be at Landmark next week. And so I wanted to read this book in preparation for that event. We are just 20 minutes south of Nashville in Franklin, Tennessee. And so we are in the midst of the music industry. And so I thought this would be a fun event to look more at the business side of Taylor Swift's rise and what led to that. And what's so neat is that so many of the people that are mentioned in the book live right here in Nashville. So that's what I'm currently reading. I just finished reading The Great Gatsby, and that was in preparation for the Short Great Books reading group that I lead. And I lead that in person and then online as well. You can join if you'd like. You just become a paid subscriber on my Substack. But we discussed The Great Gatsby this past month, and gosh, this is my third time reading the book. Each time I read it, it gets better and better. It's so odd. It's the devastation, destruction, violence, and yet I've got this like warm, fuzzy feeling reading it, and don't exactly know what to make of that. But really enjoyed the discussions and the groups that we had about the book. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter. And if you do want to join that reading group, the book we're reading next month for May is Sophocles. We're going to do a Greek tragedy, Philoctetes, and that's one of my favorites, and it's such a good one. So if you're interested, become a paid subscriber and you'll get all the details going forward. I'll be back next week to discuss another book from this year's reading list. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.